I was asked to talk to you today about my personal journey, but in a way my story perfectly encapsulates what you've heard this morning. If I look back on it now, it is very clear that in 1970, when my mother became a recluse, that in fact she was an undiagnosed depressive from 1970 until she died last year. When I grew up, obviously as a teenager, because my mother was a recluse and because I was the last of 5 children, it meant that I had to mediate the world for her. And so I had to do things that adults would typically do, and I wasn't able to do things that teenagers would typically do. So I couldn't have people at home. I just didn't have those sort of teenage freedoms, but I had a lot of responsibilities. The good thing about that is it made me very independent and it made me very resilient. And that's important because I had a very interesting career, but I had and I do apologise if there are any Russians in the audience, but I am going to have a dig at Russian men, or one Russian man anyway, a man. I did marry a Russian man. He was highly educated, multilingual, very charming, very funny. I met him when I was working for Shell and working in Russia, and fell in love, got married, and my life turned to hell overnight. So as it turned out, and this was only after he was removed from the house by the police and I had 4 broken bones and the whole saga of yuckiness that you might imagine, he was actually diagnosed manic depressive, which we now call bipolar, but in those days it was called manic depression. He was also obsessive compulsive, and he also had maudlin jealousy. And what that means is, we could be at home and he would suddenly explode about this affair I was having with a man that we'd walked past out of the tube station in London, some random stranger. But in his mind, it became this thing. And this could go on for 3 days. And he could be pulling me by my hair down the stairs, it was an extraordinary process. And the thing with someone who is suffering that kind of psychotic and manic behaviour is that you lose yourself in it. You become part of their psyche. And even though I was a senior executive with Shell, I owned my own, well, the bank owned the home, but I mean, in principle, I owned my own home. I was highly educated. I couldn't get myself out of that environment. It required other people to come and take me and do things in relation to him. Long story short, I also managed to get pregnant in that time. I'm not quite sure how, but anyhow. Now, my son, if I look at it, who is a bipolar sufferer, turns 23 tomorrow, which is World Mental Health Day. How ironic that he was born on that. But anyway, if I look at it now, he had almost 0 chance of coming out without some kind of disorder, because with my ex-husband, as a result of my experiences, I didn't know it myself, but a neighbour was able to identify that I, in fact, was suffering from depression. When she saw me crawling up the stairs on my hands and knees and then talking to me, and then I realised I could be sitting for hours and not know what's happened, and I was very dark and very black, etc., etc. So I had depression, and then I had a son who had a father with bipolar, and where I now, looking back on it, think I probably have, my own genetic history of depression. I suffer today from major depression. If it hadn't been for some incredible women, actually, in my life, and my wonderful second husband, most wonderful man in the universe, sorry everybody, but he is, I probably wouldn't be standing here today, because my son, when he was about 12, he started to change. His body shapes changed. His manner of speech changed. He became, having been a very if I put it up here, you know, a very sweet, loving boy. We've all hopefully got lovely family photographs of, you know, mums and dads with their happy children. He turned from that into that. And what does that actually look like? Well, this is black and angry and sad. But the thing with bipolar that I discovered was that if you're young, it is very hard to get a diagnosis, even though I realised that I was seeing my husband, whom my son had not seen since he was 7 months old. He was doing exactly what my husband. He was speaking in the same way, speaking fast. He was very angry, he was so angry, he was very violent. He could get things like a thick rope. This happened one evening, put it on the kitchen island bench, got a big carving knife and started talking about how he was going to slice that and this was going to be the rivers of blood in this house. He was very violent. He got into a lot of trouble. He used drugs. He, you know, it was it has been a very terrible time for him. And I spent years and years and years, I've got the roll-up, trying to get a diagnosis for him. So just as Cindy talked about schizophrenia being typically a disease of young people, the same applies to bipolar. Our mental health system needs a very big shake-up because I had private insurance, I had, you know, educated, I had a support of a fantastic husband, and we could not navigate that mental health system to get the help that my son needed. So today, I'd have to say, and anyone who was here last night will know that my son was in that kind of shape last night, happy and wonderful. He's held a job for nine months. That's a first. So is there light at the end of the tunnel? I hope it's not an oncoming train. I really hope it is general light at the end of the tunnel. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.